Hey everyone, I am David Neal, Principal Developer Advocate for Pluralsight, and I could not be more thrilled to have with me today Sam Aaron, the creator of Sonic Pi. I would love to introduce you. Sam, could you give us a little bit about yourself?
Hello there. I'm Sam. I'm a programmer. I've got the T-shirt, and I've written a programming system called Sonic Pi, which hopefully we'll talk about, which is a system that lets you to turn code, simple code, into music. And I created it for two reasons, really. One is that to support professional DJs live coding, so they'll be performing in big venues by projecting their code and writing it and making cool music. But actually, primarily, it's to learn how to do computer science. So the system is the same system that's used by professional DJs is used in schools to teach computer science, and so it's simple enough for everyone to get started.
That's awesome. It seems to me that there's typically a high correlation between people who are in programming and who also have some kind of creative outlet. Um, is that your experience too? Have you seen a lot of folks who are interested in the possibility of creating music as well as learning technology?
Yeah, and that's a really good point. I think that creativity and code are definitely hand in hand, and we, as programmers, we start with blank sheets often, or other people's work, and we modify it, and we imagine the world that we want to create, and we create that from nothing, really. I think it's one of the most expressive tools of human expression we have that just isn't yet understood, I think, by society in general. But it's an amazing, powerful tool that lets you not just write business apps, which obviously is the predominant application of code today, but also lets you write poetry and music and all sorts of interesting artistic forms of expression that really humanity is yet to properly and excitingly pursue yet. So I think we really get to see what we can do as humans when we apply code creatively.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, can you tell me about what was the reason why you created Sonic Pi? What was your motivation for doing that in the first place?
Yeah, I mean, I can spend hours talking this. I'll be try and be quick as possible. I've always been interested in the intersection of code and the arts. I was at a programming conference where they had a really interesting after party where they had a bunch of musicians play, and I just had my thought, oh, I wonder if you could make code the music. Of course, as with everything with computer science, once you start looking in, you've seen people doing it for 50 years in the past. In fact, in this case, even Ada Lovelace, she imagined that the computers, the engines that she was working with Charles Babbage, could be used for creative pursuits, and particularly in music. So this is not new at all. But I then focused on working on systems. I worked on it for many years. And then I had a lucky break to work on a project specifically for schools. And so I developed a system that was a music system that was also code to let like kids, instead of doing sorting algorithms or printing 1 to 10, to actually code bass lines and synth riffs. And it's actually the same difficulty to sort numbers as it is to actually play a bass riff. And I think that bass riffs are way more engaging, and drum breaks are way more engaging than the kind of like quite boring computer science applications you see in schools at the moment. So it was just great fun to work on that, and it was successful. I carried on working with it and still working on it today now. It's really lovely to see not just it be successful in the school context, but actually there are worldwide DJs using the same system now, performing on huge stages, and it's amazing to see.
I'd love to dive into some of those stories that you have, or feedback you've gotten from different folks. So, is there a specific story of like a teacher or student that who has used Sonic Pi and that's particularly interesting to you?
Yeah, I mean, there's examples in the classroom. Often teachers I work with might say, these are the gifted students, you should put more effort into these, and these aren't the gifted students. And actually turns out that segregation isn't at all valid. And often the kids that are being sort of put aside and not really given enough focus are the ones which really shine. And that's really beautiful to see that, and to see the teacher actually get it completely wrong. And I've seen, and it's really lovely to see children take the code and do things you haven't taught them to do. So early on in the early days that we were looking at playing the bass at the same time as the drums. Well, actually, that wasn't the case. The kids wanted to play the bass at the same time as the drums, and they would put their hands up and say, how do I do that? And it wasn't on the curriculum, because to do the bass and the drums, you need to do concurrency, which is multiple things at the same time. So this was an example where the kids were really driving what they wanted to do and pushing it forwards. And so I had to sneak in concurrency into the system without actually telling the teachers I've done that. That was fun. And then in terms of actual performances, there's a really amazing performer. She's called DJ Dave. She's based in New York, and she's performing in huge venues now. And it's amazing to see her really her career really blossoming. And she predominantly uses she mixes Sonic Pi, live coding, and sort of traditional DJ with decks and combines the two. And so it's just to watch her do her work and really demonstrate and hopefully help to change the social perspective of programming as not just a tool for business, but as a tool for human expression. When all the people go and see her performing on stage, they're seeing a professional programmer, and that professional programmer isn't doing some database transactions or doing some distributed computing. She's live coding the music that they're dancing to, and I think that's to me is a really inspiring, exciting thing. And they feed back together. So when you go into the schools and you say you need to learn to code, and you show them pictures of DJ Dave and say, would you like to do this? That becomes the engaging mechanism to get them excited and to want to do it, rather than you need to learn to code because we tell you to. The kids need to be motivated from their own right, and I think music is an amazing tool for that.
Yeah, that's incredible. Making learning fun while also providing some motivation to explore and be creative and giving that positive feedback loop for kids. That sounds awesome. Have you seen Sonic Pi be used in some unexpected ways since you've created it?
Yes, I read about a lady. She wrote a whole opera with code using Sonic Pi, which was amazing to see. I've seen a chap from Turkey. He coded his own. Well, not his own. He coded traditional Turkish scales in Sonic Pi and used those for a traditional Turkish performance. So yes, it's a real range of different things, and it's nice to be able to see the system I developed in the UK, which perhaps may have a very specific focus on sort of Western traditions of music, actually not have those constraints at all, and people using it for a wide variety of different cultural approaches to music, which is really nice to see.
Yeah. So we've talked about education and performance. What are maybe some ways that folks who are working with databases today and having to deal with ACID transactions or building, different kinds of business applications, how might they use Sonic Pi as a creative outlet, or help spark some creativity in the work that they do?
ACID transactions is quite good. The ACID base. I think it's a good question. I mean, in general, I think using tools like Sonic Pi, which are obviously focused on audio. There's many other live coding systems that have an audio application. Sonic Pi is one of many. But also the visual tools can be just a really nice thing just to use the skills you've got and explore different outputs where perhaps you don't really care so much about the precision and the quality of the results. You're just expressing yourself in the same way you might go to a piece of paper and doodle some pictures and not worry that you're making this professional piece of art, but just doodling and having fun. And in that process, you'll actually learn a lot, because you'll get into positions where you'll want to be able to do something and you don't quite know how to do it. And then you'll learn. You'll be intrinsically motivated to learn that thing. And those skills are all directly transferable back and forth between writing Sonic Pi code and writing your database transactions. In fact, Sonic Pi code is currently written in a language called Ruby, and there's a lot of direct transfer to Ruby on Rails. But of course, many other languages as well have very similar constructs. So there's that, but there's interesting application about using sound as a sonic form of understanding things. I mean, in the olden days when they talk about sort of debugging these old computers in sort of the 50s and 60s, a lot of that was actually going around and listening to the computers, because they made whirring and buzzing and noises because they were physical operational things. And if you heard the computer going that wasn't the normal, then you could hear that perhaps there was something wrong with that. So there's an interesting way to think about how you could convert the data that you're observing into sound, and then be able to listen to that to be able to detect patterns and to hear where things are correct and perhaps are not correct. Yeah,
that made me think of when you're learning a language or a new system for creating something, programming. What are some of like the concepts of computer science that you can learn using Sonic Pi?
Very good question. Sonic Pi was developed specifically in line with the UK computer science curriculum. So it was designed to teaching basic data structures and algorithms and sequencing and conditionals, and it does all of those really, really easily. I mean, a baseline is a list of notes to play and an order of the notes and a list of the timings of which notes to play. And so a list of numbers can be converted to a baseline. It is actually a baseline, just to how you interpret it. So you can do all the really the basic computer science stuff, but also actually a lot more interesting advanced stuff. So I already mentioned sort of briefly before, concurrency. That's critical in a musical context. When you have a band, it's much simpler to have a person playing the drums, a person playing the bass, a person singing, and a person playing the guitar, than to have one person attempt to do all those things at the same time. And so having multiple things, multiple actors in the same system working together in sort of an Erlang sense or an Elixir sense is actually very natural in music. And so Sonic Pi has that as its core concept. I mean, you can see that you can drive the bass and the drums at the same time. But also there's also aspects about live coding where you're working with a system that's perhaps too large to switch off, and you need to be able to modify it and fix the bugs live whilst it's running, which is true of many of the large systems around in the world today. You don't have the luxury of saying, right, I'm going to shut the whole system down, fix the bug, bring it back up again. You need to be able to hot swap the code as it's currently running, and so Sonic Pi actually is designed for that. So as I'm running the code, if I just left it going, it would just get boring pretty quickly. So what I'm actually doing is I'm injecting new lines of code all the time and modifying it as it's running without actually stopping the program. And that's a really nice way of doing exploratory design, and you could apply that same process to your database transactions, to all sorts of different things where you want a system where you want to ask lots of questions and get the results really quickly and have a very sort of flow-like interaction with the computer.
Yeah, that sounds awesome. Well, as a technologist, that sounds like an amazing way to play around with the structures and loops and all that kind of stuff. But on the flip side, on the music side of things, what have been some of the reactions from, like, say, musical purists when they hear about something like this? What do they say?
That's a good question as well. I mean, it's interesting. In the school situation, I've worked obviously with computer science teachers and music teachers, and typically the computer science teachers are the ones which are easiest to get excited by. They're really desperate to find ways to engage children in computer science, because that's actually really that's the hard part. It's easy to teach computer science. It's hard to get people excited and to actually care about it. Whereas the musical teachers often, I feel that there's been a lot more sort of gatekeeping and sort of friction and restriction about what I'm doing, because it's obviously not traditional music in the way that they would perhaps perceive it. Because we're taking a lot of these traditional forms and constraints and just tearing them apart, in the sense that the composer is not the same as the instrument and it's not the same as the performer. And with live code, you can actually combine all those three things together, and you can mix them in whichever sort of amounts you want. So you obviously can have it all do the composition is the performer, but you can also have the instrument be the composition, it's really fun to play around with those ideas. And so we're taking music into a new direction, but also not trying to replace existing music. I think that's a critical thing. Code is a fabulous tool that lets us compose using code as our instead of doing dots on lines, we write simple words. And then instead of those dots on lines instructing the violin player or instructing the piano player, these words will instruct the computer to perform, but also will instruct the computer to do the kind of studio mixes that you might find in a production work. So you can add reverb and distortion and compression and all those kind of cool production techniques. So you're not just composing, you're also doing production with the same code. And the nice thing then is 1,000 years later, we're able to take that same code and to reproduce the music that was performed. And I think that's why we study and look at the traditional composers, Western composers particularly, like Beethoven and Bach, is we have their notation today, but we don't have the notation of Aphex Twin, and we don't have the notation of Daft Punk. We have to sort of reverse engineer those things. So I think code gives us an opportunity for the next generation of composers, if they were to use code, for their work to be captured and studied in the future.
Oh, that is a great point. That gets me even more excited about learning Sonic Pi. So, you can learn technology. You can also learn music theory. And as you just pointed out, you can also learn a bit about production and like, the different effects or mixing and things that go along with performance. What about the community? What have been some of the reactions like? Has there a community that's kind of built up around this tool now?
Absolutely, yes. I mean, there's a larger community of artistic programmers doing all sorts of interesting pursuits. There's a large community of live coders using a variety of different coding languages, and then within that, there's the community of Sonic Pi users, and we have a really nice forums, and that's got inside of it. We've got musicians, of course, programmers, artists, teachers, all working together, and it's really nice to see like a teacher asking a question about how they might sort of demonstrate some particular algorithm, and then have a musician answer that question, and to have code be sort of the lingua franca, the common language that people can use across these domains, which perhaps they would never have talked to each other before. Perhaps the musician wouldn't talk to the teacher, wouldn't talk to the computer scientist, and now they're all talking fluently together, and it's really nice to see sharing across those boundaries in a beautiful way. So I'm really excited to see that, and I think that code is obviously music is one way of doing this. Once more of the society can understand a little bit of code, not necessarily everyone be professional programmers, but just everyone can understand and just understand a little bit what code is and how it can work and how we can use it to express ourselves and how we can express business needs and we can express artistic needs, then I think that we'll be able to communicate with each other much more effectively. And I think that's a beautiful future to imagine.
Awesome. That is that sounds amazing. Well, I know you're going to show us a little bit about the code and give us a performance. Is there anything else before we jump into that maybe I forgot to ask?
Not really, I don't think. I mean, I could talk for hours about it. Obviously, we haven't got hours. But it's really just if there's anything to say, is to say that code is for everyone. And if you're worried about if it's useful for you or not, just experiment and play. If you're the experimental, expressive kind, then live coding and music could be something that you could use just to get started, or at least have that kind of conversation with others. I mean, a good example I have is that whenever I go to parties, which hasn't been for a while now because of the whole COVID thing, but when I used to go to parties, I used to, in the early days, I used to tell people I was a programmer, and that would kill the conversation. And it was pretty depressing, really, because I wanted to talk about programming. So now I lie, and I say, I'm a musician. And people go, oh, cool, what do you play? And I say, code. And I've got them in the conversation, and then suddenly we can start to talk about the expressivity of code. And so I think that once we start to see code in a different light, and we can see performers like DJ Dave on stage, and that hopefully changes the perception, social perception of code to be something that's not just for business, but for everybody. I think all of us can start to explore, all of us can start to experiment and dabble and play. And just, I think that's just going to be a good thing for everybody. So code is for everybody. You don't have to do complicated things. That's there if you want to, just in the same way that sports is for everybody. Not everyone will be a professional sports person, but everyone should have a bit of sports in their life. And it's good for your body and your soul. Yeah. And coding is the same.
This code is for everybody. I love that. And Sam, you're not being a liar. You are a musician. Just as I say, anyone who writes a single line of code, they are a programmer. They're just starting their journey as a programmer. So you can safely say that you are a musician. So I'd like to turn it over to you. Show us a little bit about the code and what that looks like. And
really shall I just crack on with the performance then?
Yeah, let's do it.
So I'm going to start simple with some ambient stuff, just because it's like I have to switch my mind into the performance mode. Then I'm going to start to amp it up into a bit more sort of acid techno. So get your dancing shoes on, but it'll just start off a bit slow as I'm switching my brain over to coding mode, and then we'll get into dancing mode. So enjoy and catch me on the internet, everyone. Bye.
And I completely believe you do not need all that complexity.